All right, so we're diving deep today, and this one's especially for you. We're going into Surah Ar-Room from the Quran, a really powerful chapter, and one that you specifically asked us to unpack. So,
Yeah, it's a fascinating one for sure.
definitely.
I mean, the Romans, right, that's what Aru means. And it takes us back to Mecca before the migration to Medina. So, a time of intense challenges for the early Muslims. And this surah, it really digs into some of those really core foundational ideas of the faith.
Yeah, absolutely. And the historical context is just so interesting, right? We're talking about around 615 AD, the Byzantine Empire. They had just suffered this huge defeat against the Persian Empire.
Right. And that was a really big deal.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you have to remember the polytheists in Mecca at the time, they saw this as like a good omen for them. The Persians, they weren't followers of the Abrahamic faiths, and they had just defeated the Christian Romans, who, in their minds, were closer to what they believed. So they took it as a sign that their own traditions were stronger than this rising monotheism of Islam.
Right. Like it was validating their worldview in a way.
Exactly. But then along comes Surah Ar-Room, and it offers this completely different perspective.
Yeah, and so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to try to kind of extract these profound life lessons that are embedded within Surah Ar-Room. And, they were speaking directly to this very specific historical moment.
Yeah, total.
So let's start with this prophecy that, I mean, it must have just sounded absolutely unbelievable at the time.
Oh, yeah. So we're talking about verses 30.1 to 5, and they actually foretold that the Romans, despite this crushing defeat they had just suffered, they would eventually be victorious within just a few years. I mean, can you imagine?
Yeah.
Hearing that when the Persians had just, basically demolished them.
It seemed impossible.
Yeah.
And of course, the Meccans who were opposed to the Muslims, they used this to ridicule them. But the surah, it directly addressed their interpretation. And here's what's, I think, really interesting, for you, the listener. This prophecy, it actually was fulfilled. And incredibly, it coincided with the Muslims' own victory at the Battle of Badr.
Which is just like, wow.
Yeah.
It's like about timing.
Yeah, exactly.
But the bigger point here, the real takeaway, is about the certainty of Allah's promises.
Right.
Like even when things look really, really bleak, right?
Yeah.
We're called to have this unwavering trust in the divine plan. And verse 30.6, it really emphasizes this. It says that Allah's promise never fails, but most people, they don't get it. They don't really understand that.
Yeah, it's that contrast between our limited human understanding and this much bigger picture. Okay, so let's move on to our second key theme here. And this is something that, I think you might find yourself reflecting on even in your everyday life. And that's the signs of Allah in creation.
Right.
And the importance of what's called tafakkur, or deep reflection.
Yeah, so verses 30.1719, they encourage us to glorify Allah at all these different times of the day and night, and they link these natural cycles, the sun rising, the sun setting, to the idea of resurrection. It's about this constant remembrance, dhikr,
Yeah.
And then you get to verses 30.2027, and they present this whole series of signs that are just meant for us to contemplate.
Yeah, like our creation from dust.
Yeah.
Which is, that's just a really humbling thought, right? Like we start from something so basic.
Absolutely.
And then the creation of spouses, offering tranquility, love, what's called mawadda and mercy, rahmah.
Yeah.
So it's highlighting marriage as this really profound sign from Allah. And then there's the diversity of languages, the diversity of colors, which, that's something we experience all the time, right?
All the time, yeah. And even just thinking about the simple things, like sleep, and the fact that we have to go out and, seek our livelihoods, even those basic human needs. They're pointing towards this larger design.
Yeah.
And then you have these really powerful images like lightning and rain, right? Bringing life back to the seemingly dead earth. It's like an analogy for spiritual renewal, for resurrection.
Yeah, it's purely.
Yeah, and the surah, it talks about the firmament, how it's held in place by his command, the obedience of everything in the heavens and earth to Allah. And then this fundamental truth that Allah is the originator of creation and that ultimately he will restore it all. And I think if we connect this back to our own lives, it's an invitation to really, really look at these everyday things that we might take for granted,
Yeah.
and to see the deeper meaning that they hold.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so our third theme here, it goes into this concept of fitra, which is our natural inclination, and why it's so important for us to stay grounded in our beliefs.
Yeah, so verses 3032, they talk about how humanity is inherently inclined towards monotheism, towards the essence of Islam. It's like this pure state that we're created in.
Right.
But then, of course, external influences, they can pull us away from that.
Yeah.
And we also see this, this tendency that's so common to turn to Allah when things are tough, when we're struggling, but then, when things are good, we kind of forget.
Yeah, we get comfortable, we get complacent.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so the Surah is reminding us, you, me, all of us, that we need to nurture that innate faith, that fitra. And we need to stay firm in our belief in one God, especially when life is easy.
Mm-hmm. And verse 30.60, it reinforces this whole idea of patience and steadfastness.
Yeah, perseverance,
Okay, so let's talk about our responsibilities within our community, within society.
All right, so verses 30.3638, they talk about charity, about giving to those who are in need.
Mm-hmm.
And then verse 30.39, it draws this really stark contrast between usury, what's called riba, and zakat, and just general charity,
right,
emphasizing this need for ethical financial conduct. And what's really insightful here is that the Surah actually connects our actions to the state of the world around us.
Right.
Like verses 30.4143, they say that corruption, it's a result of what we do, of our deeds.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that our choices have this ripple effect, They impact the whole society.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, the Surah also touches on the cycle of life and death and the hereafter.
Right.
In verses 30.5457.
Right.
And it stresses that we will be held accountable for what we do in this life.
Yeah.
So some key takeaways for you here, I think, are the importance of generosity, being charitable, behaving ethically, being aware of the consequences of our actions, and preparing for the afterlife.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think all of these themes that we've been talking about, they all point back to the central principle of Tawheed.
The oneness of Allah.
Exactly, the oneness of Allah.
Right.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Surah Ar-Room, we've explored all these lessons about trusting in divine wisdom, the importance of reflecting on creation, being patient, being grateful, the significance of our communities, the importance of accountability, and that fundamental unity of God.
Yeah, it kind of makes you think, like, where do you see those signs in your own life? In those little, maybe even ordinary moments? What are those things that strengthen your trust in this, this bigger plan that we're all part of? And I mean, going back and revisiting the verses of Surah Ar-Room, I think you'll find even more profound insights there.
I think so too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was a great discussion. Thanks for joining me on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. It was my pleasure.
And to you, the listener, thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.
See you next time.